So, a very long time ago, somebody asked me what my all-time dream team SPL superstar combo fusion dance mashup would be. And now, nearly 8 months later, I thought, I'm going to make a video about it because I can. So, without further ado, this is my dream team. This is not going to be objective at all. This is not going to be like, hey, this person has done statistically the best and won this. This is purely my own thoughts based on what I've seen. And you might say, well, this is biased, blah, blah, blah. And you would be 100% correct. It'll be very biased. In fact, I intend it to be biased because, it's my opinion. Sometimes they're players that I've enjoyed watching. Sometimes I've enjoyed watching them improve, or maybe I've enjoyed the story behind them. There's a ton of different parts to it. So, yeah, like I said, if you think it's biased, it's because it is. This is going to involve players from all different periods, not just recent, all different regions, of varying accomplishments. And I'm going to be mentioning a lot of my honorable mentions because I hate just saying one player and, because you don't know how close it was to other players being picked. And by the way, this is not going to be a short, quick video where I rapidly rattle them off. This is going to be a long ramble about some players and what I think about them. So, if you're here for a quick one-stop shop, then not the place for you. This is going to be this is going to be a ramble extraordinaire. So yeah, without further ado, let's crack on. So I'm going to start with solo and work my way across from there. So starting us off in solo, I'm going to just quickly touch on some of my honorable mentions, like my old loves, Game Hunter and Zalia. Game Hunter was, back in Season 0, the best player in the world by a mile. First ever pentakill. Used to run stuff like Chronos solo and body people with it. Vamana was also, calling card of his. He was just mechanically nuts. Unfortunately, a bit of a one-season wonder as that team kind of fizzled out from there. But he was one of the original sort of playmakers, difference makers of his time. Really mechanically skilled and a massive part of why TSM won their launch tournament. Zalia was a personal favorite of mine. I loved watching Zalia play. I thought mechanically he was insane, and he brought some really interesting picks to the solo lane. Like he played Ra solo, and that was probably his best pick. Bakasura, he kind of popularized Bakasura's solo. Unfortunately, he was a bit of a victim of the transition from the sort of assassin carry style of solo meta towards the big bruiser style, because that was never really his thing. You never want to see him play like Kukalan or Bologna, and unfortunately, that's pretty good, and that's quite a bad thing to not be good at. So unfortunately fell off pretty hard. You also have people like Omega, who was the proto pressure warrior in solo. Again, he was strong for his period, but only was around for a few seasons before eventually, so Ego looked good there as well, but unfortunately I then went to jungle, which was awful, and then never really touched Smite again. So you already start to see how much the longevity of a player's career is affecting my decision process, because if someone's good for a season, that's good and all, but when someone manages to be good for 5 years straight, that's a big deal. Cyclone Spin also has to get a mention, even though he hasn't played in solo for like 5 years now, but when he was at his best, he was unbelievably good. This focus is fucking with me. Okay, sorry if I keep getting really close to the camera. My camera is determined to focus on my suit hanging up there rather than my face, so I apologize. So those are sort of the kind of honorable mentions. The first player I want to seriously discuss is one you probably might not expect, actually, and that's Divios. Divios is someone who I feel like his reputation has been kind of forgotten as of late. Divios was an amazing player and had a really big impact on how solo was played. He played all sorts of jank, but also had the ability to play that jank and then also play the super high pressure warriors and play them really well. Like, you remember his Hercules. He was the original Hercules and he was unkillable. He ran the solo lane for a very long time. Probably the most dominant laner between when Cognitive Red started their rise, sort of midway through Season 1, all the way through to when TSM disbanded. So Divios at his best was a beast, and even people like Cyclone's been struggled to lane against him. Omega struggled, everyone struggled, and he brought out all sorts of picks like Hades and all of this kind of stuff. He played Janus solo, made that work. He did it all really, and he was always inventing new stuff for the game. He was always one of the biggest thinkers about the game. I hate the word theory crafting, but he did a lot of it. He was constantly trying to come up with new stuff, and finding stuff that wasn't popular but that was still good. So he had a really big impact in the game that way. But I think Divios' biggest enemy has been himself. This is hard for me to speak on, as I never knew the person, never teamed with him or anything like that, but I know that he was originally kicked from the TSM team, the COG Red team back in the day. And the story you hear through the grapevine from the pros is that, he's just someone who they would struggle to ever see themselves teaming with again. Whether that's fair, I don't know. I obviously don't know the person, and I might just be basically slandering someone who's a really nice guy. I have no idea. The other point I would make about it in terms of himself being his own worst enemy is he played the game the way he wanted to play it, which a lot of the time was really good when what he wanted to do was good. But for example, if you looked at Eager in Season 3 were a really strong team. And in fact, that's a kind of another thing about Divios that people forget, is that he's been on a bunch of really top teams. The COG Red TSM team, the Eager team that, realistically could have won Worlds that year, and the Splice team that did win Worlds. When he was on that Eager team, they found themselves struggling against Obey and struggling against the pressure coming out of Variety from the solo lane. And they've spoken before about how they wanted Divios to get back onto his Warriors, back onto his Bellonas and stuff like that, which he used to love, but Divios' thing at the time was Guardians. He loved playing Guardians, and he just basically refused to play the Warriors. And it's one of those things where objectively you can look at it with results-based thinking, right, and be like, oh well, they lost, what an asshole for not doing that. But you can also look at it in ways when it works, suddenly people are going, oh my god, it's amazing that he stuck to his guns and got it right. You either live or die by the sword on that one. So yeah, it's one of those things where for every good thing that he's done, there's just this little kind of in the back of your head, as to whether you say he's one of the best. Obviously, he's not on a team anymore, and I don't know whether he even wants to play anymore. He had a bit of a rough end to his time on Splice, being sort of fairly unceremoniously kicked out as that team started to struggle really badly. But in their Worlds winning run, it's important to remember how important Divios was. He made Geb solo look like the best pick in the game. It was incredible. He slammed his Guardians before, and people, may have slated him for them, but when the Guardians were good in solo, god damn did he pop off. So mechanically clean and just so good at getting every little last bit of value out of something, When you see him play Geb, he would always be mechanically perfect in terms of, you hit the ult and then you wait until the stun is all the way done and then you knock up, because if you just knock up, you cancel out time in the ult. Basically, these little tiny gains that make big differences over the course of over a Worlds run, for example. And that team had some of the best team play Smite has ever seen. But unfortunately, the kind of up and down tumultuous style of his career and the unceremonious end mean that it's a struggle to pick him in my team. The next one I want to talk about is Baskin. I say Baskin, but that's because I'm a posh wanker, so I'm going to say Baskin. When people talk about the individual best players of all time, especially in terms of mechanics, Baskin is always in the question. Always. As he should be. I don't think any one player has been so clearly superior in their role other than maybe adapting in Season 2. Baskin was just so good. Season 3 saw Baskin was just a menace. You'd see him, this was at a time when solo laners were getting an unbelievable amount of farm, and you'd see him casually hit level 20 at like 15 minutes on a regular basis. He was just so kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but like ahead of the game. He was just running the meta, running the picks. He would always come out on top in his lane, always come out with a lead. Even if his team was losing, he'd have a lead and he'd become a total raid boss to deal with. But yeah, just mechanically one of the best to ever do it, if not the best. So why is he not higher, I hear you say? Well, because his career never really came to be. He semi-final performance at Worlds with C9, a good run on Saw, that was a really strong team, all of these kind of things, but he never quite achieved as much as I think everyone expected him to, and especially as much as someone of his quality could have. He's always been in and out of school and has taken that very seriously, which is extremely important. And I'd rather he did that than, just piss it all away for a bit of Smite. And that's obviously hurt his career, hurt his ability to be in and out of top teams. I was going to say that he was also, for all the leads that he got, he never felt like he won that many games by himself. He felt like if his team was losing, he often struggled to turn it around in the same way that other carry players can win games by themselves, like the Emilito types. I think a lot of that might come down to the fact that he was just unfortunate to be at his peak at a time when Energy were also at their peak. So it's like, you might be good, but you're not Energy good. So yeah, Baskin is one that there's a parallel universe where he is undoubtedly the top solo lane to ever do it. But unfortunately, for all of his mechanical skill, the achievements don't quite match up to those later on down the list. Okay, one that's not going to be my pick, and I can already see this causing a bit of controversy, and that is Fine OK. Fine OK, if he keeps up his current trajectory, definitely can be. He can become the greatest of all time, and in fact, he's probably pretty damn close. But it's important to remember with Fine OK that he's actually been around for a very long time and was a very middling player for a lot of that period. He played in teams like the old Counter Logic and stuff like that, where he was a middle-of-the-road player. Good, not bad by any means, but, I think about games when they played Rival, for example, and Rival just dumpstered them. I think that was the game where Deathwalker was caught in comms going, yo, what division are these guys? Like, they destroyed them. And it's why when he was picked up for the team Rival in Season 6, a lot of people had question marks. They're like, why are you picking up Fine OK? There's so many better options. And then he went on to be the best player in the league at the time. And everyone was like, oh, fuck, okay, this is why you picked him up. But the reason why he's not top of my list is kind of the shortness of the time he's been at the top. The fact that it's actually been there's been a lot of really good solo laners that have challenged him. I would say he's come out as the top solo laner in the last few years, but he's not been like head and shoulders above the rest. I mean, he has been better. I'm not doubting that, but compared to some of the other names on this list where it's been like, okay, this person is just the best, like undoubted. And maybe that's just unfortunate because there are so many other good players in the league, right? So, there is a lot of arguments to be had here, and I'm not saying that I'm objectively right at all. The other thing I would say is, I'm not usually one to put too much weight onto sort of official world championships because it's like, if Ghost win game 5, he's a world's winner, and they lost game 5, so now he's not. And I don't think your assessment of a player should wildly change based on, those little metrics. It's like, okay, so let's say they won that Titan push in game 5. He's now suddenly so much better. Like, it's one game. But at the same time, they realistically, Ghost should be sitting, Jade Dragon, should be sitting on 2 world titles, and they're not. PK just had their number, and it's one of those unfortunate things where in those moments where even when he stepped up really hard, he did so much work for his team, especially in Season 7, but when it's not enough to win, it's just, it's just unfortunate that he fell that tiny bit short. But clearly a world-class player, and if his career continues at this sort of breakneck pace, then yes, he will definitely be in the contention of, if not the best in the world. This season, not been his best season so far. This has been probably his weakest period, I would say, which is surprising because he has been so consistent. If I can think of one word to describe Fine OK over the last few seasons, it has been consistent. No matter what their team is doing, he has been consistently good. So, he's getting soloed hit once or twice, not quite on his A game. And that's fine. That team has been a bit up and down, so you're not going to be smashing it all the time. But I would say the other reason why I kind of struggle to put him at the top of the list is because he's been on such a dominant team this whole time, and it's easy to look very good when the rest of your team are doing really well. The counterpoint to that is obviously that he has done really well when his team aren't doing well. Like think of Game 4 in the World Finals where he played Cthulhu and just ran that game when that he was the difference maker in that game. Like I said, one day we'll be up there if he keeps up. Hey everyone, Future Dan here. Guess who forgot to include 2-time world champion solo laner Dimmy the Deathless on his original list? What can I say? This is a high production value video. Yeah, to talk about Dimmy. So Dimmy, you might think would probably come higher on my list than he has. Dimmy is a player who is very fondly remembered by everyone, including myself, not just for his gameplay, but for being a general, stand-up guy. But everyone you speak to talks about him. I think Finch described him as the literal perfect human being. He's like really intelligent, very humble. I'm pretty sure he designed one of the logos. I think it might have been for the Valkyries this year. Like, What can't this man do? Dimmy as a solo laner was untouchable in season 2. There's a reason why he died 9 times in an entire season. I think it was something like that. That run on Epsilon, he was just, clean. What other word is there for someone who only dies 9 times in a season? He was doing all of the right stuff, and just there was this precision to his play. He soloed a ton of people, including Benji in season 2 enemy finals with his tier against Bologna, which is a sick solo kill if you watch it, because it really sums up Dimmy's sort of mechanical precision, because it's a tier fearless, blink fearless combo, but you see him weave a ton of autos in the middle, which is a really precise thing to do, and without those he wouldn't have got the kill. It would have been close but wouldn't have got it. But that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about in terms of mechanical precision, just getting that little extra more out of each different fight. And Dimmy at his best was one of the best to ever do it. People call him the team fight god for a reason. He just always seemed to be in the right place in team fights, and that to me was Dimmy's biggest strength, was that in a team that was so reliant on their team fights in Epsilon NRG, that's just how they won everything. They figured they could out team fight everyone, and Dimmy was a massive part of that. He's just in the right place at the right time. He always seemed to get values in fights, even when, as his career started to go on, he started to lose his lane dominance, and you saw it especially in the Obey sets at Season 3 World Finals, where he was down to Variety. He was getting soloed by Variety a ton, because Variety was just shit hot. But even then, he was down, behind, but he was still making an impact every single fight. And that's the thing as a solo laner. You don't need to be the alpha Chad all the time. You just need to be good enough to wreck their backline, to make their hunters and their mid laners and maybe even their junglers run away from you. And that's what he did every single time. And it didn't matter if he died for it. He was just in the right place at the right time. And that's such a powerful thing to have, because it basically means that you can leave the solo lane alone. And that's what NRG did a lot. In the Obey set, admittedly, they did start to put a bit more attention towards him, because, he was getting really quite far behind. But at the same time, for most of the NRG Epsilon period, they just left him to it. They were just like, fuck it. There you go. Here's a solo lane. Go do your thing. We'll see you in 20 minutes when you rotate and win the game for us. I think his signature picks were, stuff like tier, basically anything with a good team fight. And that was just Dimmy's signature pick. Very, very good player. Very, very good member of the community. So why does he not feature highly on my list? And well, that's because when he was at his peak, he was amazing. His peak was a lot shorter than I think people realize. Don't get me wrong, he went nearly deathless in season 2, but at the same time, as a solo laner, it's very easy to look very good on a team like that. Just do your role in the team in the laning phase. Admittedly, he didn't just do his role; he was soloing people left and right. But he could have been a lot worse and still looked good, because their team fights were already going so well that he comes in and makes a big impact, and everyone's like, "Wow, amazing!" So like I said, his peak was really good, but when he started to decline, I feel like he started to fall off really quite hard. Ever since Season 3 Worlds Finals, where he was getting soloed quite a lot by Variety, I think he might have been soloed by Scary D as well. I think we kind of saw the best of Dimmy right there. And then after that, he was basically just outclassed by the other solo lane talent in the league. You're talking Variety, you're talking Deathwalker. Don't get me wrong, these are some of the highest caliber players to ever do it. But he did start to look outmatched. Maniac came back in from his hiatus playing Smite, and he outshone him in Season 4 as well. I think he was one of those, to quote DJ Khaled, he suffered from success. I think it's hard for someone who he didn't seem like naturally the biggest competitor to me. He obviously everyone enjoys winning, but he didn't have the same hunger as other people. He's not that sort of emotional sort of person that someone like Adapting might be. And you see it in when they win their worlds title. He's not the one jumping up going, ah! He's just absorbing the moment, taking it all in. And I think when someone like that wins back-to-back world titles, you lose that hunger. You lose that passion to keep grinding and keep getting better. And whereas you had players like Variety who was hungrier than ever, he got to the World's Finals and just fell short. So you felt like he had that hunger on a level that he'd not had before. And effectively that meant that as time went on, he started to become more and more outclassed by what's around him, which meant that he was the first roster change on this Epsilon Panthera NRG squad, which blew people's mind at the time. I remember it's one, as lame as it sounds, it's one of those moments where I remember where I was. I remember checking my phone and seeing, Dimmy being kicked from NRG. I was like, this is the legendary NRG team. And I think this kind of signaled the beginning of their downfall when their original comp just wasn't working out in the same way. Let's not take away from how good Dimmy was at his peak. There's a reason why people still remember him as an absolute nutcase, and it's because he was very, very enjoyable player to watch. He just, he basically plays solo lane like I wish I could have done, That's like, I wish I could have played like that, but I'm a fucking bronzy, so... but unfortunately, his time in the sun was a lot shorter than a lot of the other people on this list, which means that it doesn't rate as highly in my eyes as others. And I know that might be hard to hear because people love Dimmy, but unfortunately, that's just how I see it. But let's not forget about one thing about Dimmy as well, is that he got ill a lot. And you see it when the NRG won their titles and stuff like that. I can't remember whether it's season 2 or 3. There's one of them where he was basically playing with a massive fever, was like on the verge of death, playing as like a world finals, and they win, and you see him in his chair just like like wilting away. And so that's got to give him someone more props when you're on the verge of like passing away, to come back and carry like he did. That's big respect from me. When I'm ill, I'm in bed like, ooh, and he's there winning world championships. So maybe that's why I wasn't a pro. Right, back to old Dan. Okay, top 3. Oh my god, I've talked about solos for so long. I'm so sorry, but let's talk about variety. People don't realize how long variety has been around for. After TSM won the launch tournament back in season 0, effectively, a team called Worth Gaming burst onto the scene and, just blew them out of the water and started looking really, really good. Who was on that team, I hear you ask? Well, it was Variety in the solo lane. And it's funny because he was known as a bit of a kind of healer bot. He would just play Ra and like the Chungas and stuff like that. Which is really funny because that's, how his identity changed in Smite is very entertaining because he could not be further away from that now. But it's fair to say at that time, Variety wasn't the world beater that he was moving on. He was just another player, and he consistently worked his way up, got stronger and stronger. And then I think when he came to the forefront of most people's minds was season 3 Worlds, especially in the finals. That is one of the most destructive performances I've ever seen from a player. He was... That would have been a 3-0 set without him. I really do mean that. He just caused such a nightmare for NRG, and he almost single-handedly turned that game for NRG. Unfortunately, he didn't, but his performance is in legend. There's a lot of people that think he should be MVP in that set, and it's all good having one good tournament, but he transferred that dominance on for a long time. There's a reason why when Team Dignitas formed next year, they were formed as Variety's new team. That was their original team name before Team Dignitas picked them up, because Variety was the hotness. He was the thing, and he was just so strong in Europe and in the world stage. I think Team Dignitas were the best team in Europe, and Europe was the strongest region at that point, and he was a massive part of it. Just a machine. I think it was a lot of the reason why Dimmy was kicked off of NRG, because there was a game I remember very clearly where Variety was playing Sun Wukong, Dimmy was playing Bologna. I don't remember what the circumstances were, but he just farmed Dimmy. Farmed him to the point where you could see the writing on the wall. This one player was so much better than Dimmy that it unfortunately meant that his time in NRG kind of came to an end. Unfortunately for Variety, Team Dignitas' performances at LAN were just so bad that it's hard to say that he's one of the greatest of all time when... So he's the greatest of all time when his team didn't qualify for one of the Worlds despite being like the top team in the region at the time. And then when they did make it to Worlds, they got 3-0'd by Splice. Admittedly, a really, really, really good Splice team who are playing Smite in a way that no one had ever done it before, but, still didn't make it, which is unfortunate. And then, season 6 was another decent year, but again, didn't really amount to anything. The Dignitas team had a really good start, but, kind of, I think they got swept by Rival on the way to finals, so, not a perfect year. And then last year on Renegades, got kicked off of United, admittedly not because of his play, but more because of, other circumstances. A bit of an average year, but then you have this year where suddenly season 4 Variety is back. He has played brilliantly this year. That Camelot Kings team have come together so well, and he has been popping off in the solo lane. He really has. I think the meta really suits him. Maybe it's just because Bluestone is back. It's like, it's like nothing changed. But yeah, we're seeing the old variety back again, and I couldn't be happier for it because he's a great player to watch. Okay, top two. I think basically in my head I had to narrow it down between two, and in second place is Deathwalker, who, if you weren't around at that time, you might kind of look at someone and say, okay, yeah, he made it to 2 Worlds Finals, but, didn't win anything. Why was he that great? But if you were around at the time, you know how much he changed the solo lane, just single-handedly, man. Like, there's a reason why when Benji won... When Benji was interviewed after they won their world title against Rival, and they said, people were looking at Benji and Deathwalker as a real big solo lane matchup. They were saying, how does it feel to come out on top against one of the best? And he said, Deathwalker's still the best. Like, Deathwalker soloed him at one point when he was at his peak, was just as good as it gets, because he played the meta, and he played that really, really well. He was a beast on like the Erlang Shens, the Amaterasus, but he also played the jank, and he played the weird stuff, and having that ability to just pull out random picks and suddenly make them work is so scary, because teams aren't prepared for it, and suddenly you're just fucking with their picks and bans so much when they lock in Ares, and you're like, oh yeah, here we go, Ares support, and then suddenly it's in the solo lane, and you're like, what the fuck do we do against this? And it's killing Bellonas, and it's winning games, and he's playing Geb solo before anyone else did it. Geb Walker even held a big sign that said Geb Walker, like, he's like, guys, I'm gonna play Geb. And he did, and everyone's like, what? He actually played it. And he won, because that's just what he did. People even remember the games when he played, like, Arposh solo. Everyone was asking me to make a video on him playing Arposh solo. They lost that game, but his impact was so big that they remember it. Not only did he play with such skill, but he played the game his way. He did not play standardly at all. He played whatever he wanted. I mean, what springs to mind for me is, when I think of Deathwalker memories, is his first blood against NRG. I don't know if you guys remember this, but he was playing Erlang Shen, and he's 2v1ing Adapting and Maniac. He's at their speed buff, and he just kills Adapting. Like, just first bloods him at his own speed buff, 2v1. And it was just like, what the hell's going on here? Who is this guy? How is he doing this stuff? You have these players where they're just sometimes so far ahead of... It's not they're ahead of their competition, but they just kind of have this X factor to them. I don't know how to say it other than that. I know it's a bit of a wanky phrase, but he really did have that X factor where wildcard, you never knew what you were going to get, and he was just very, very good. Unfortunately, the lack of titles and all of that stuff, and the fact that Season 6 was rough, not his fault at all. Other reasons why that team failed, but to have a super team fail like that is a bit of a rough one. And the early seasons, he was not the player he was when he came to be, at his peak. But when he was at his peak, what a player! What a player! But that brings me on to number one, numero uno. You might have guessed it. It's of course Benji, and the reason why I picked Benji as number one is just sheer bloody consistency. This guy has been playing at the top level. Well, he made it to World's Finals in Season 2 with Enemy, the underdog team, and I thought he was really good then. And he has maintained that high level for years and years and years, even in teams that weren't very good. Like, you had E United that were a very... Sorry, I want to be clear which E United I'm talking about. Season 6 E United with, was old Rival and stuff. Even in a team like that was a very much a mid-table team, he was good. On an Enemy... that was like a team that went on a bit of a lucky run, he was amazing. On Radiance, a team that had a ton of problems last year, he was a major reason of why they finished second at MSI both times and came in as second seed to Worlds. He's just so good. He's so good. And for someone who plays the game so little, it's so infuriating to see everyone else grinding away. And he must have tons of smurfs he's not telling us about, because there is no way that you can maintain that level of play without secretly grinding. Obviously, they do scrims and stuff like that, don't get me wrong. But he just manages to bring this consistency to week in, week out, no matter what the meta, no matter what the picks, he just always seems to have it on lock. And that is such a rare, rare thing. You get these players that are good in certain metas and, dip down, all that kind of stuff. To have a player who stayed at the top for all of that time, for all of that period, is just unheard of. And even in Season 7, 5 years on from his first World's Finals performance, he's still winning games by himself, building like Heartseeker Wukong and one-shotting carries and still looking unkillable. You know what? But the only reason why I thought maybe he shouldn't be number one is because he died to that back camp after adapting saved him, and I'll never forgive him for that. What the fuck was that? But of course, the thing that most people think of Benji is his time on E United and that their World's winning run. And outside of maybe MLC Stealth on Scylla and maybe Paul at the most recent Worlds, that was the most dominant performance ever by any player at any tournament. He won those games. He really did. There was just so much pressure coming out of solo. Teams just could not handle it. It's rare that you can say someone just like won their team a game. But he did. And he did it on the biggest stage. And it was so funny because after that tournament, everyone was just first picking Cucullin. I think Benji basically stopped playing it at that point. But everyone was like, this thing, you need to be able to play this. God, he's so good. Pick him, first pick. And then they fed with him because they weren't Benji. So, yeah, I think just for the sheer consistency as being one of the best to ever do it, it has to go to Benji. Right, that was just solos. Bloody hell. Sorry, I talk for England. I need some tea to spur me on. Okay, next up is jungle. Probably the most important role in Smite historically. And I don't want to spoil it, but you might be able to guess who my number one pick is. I don't know, if you think hard enough, you might be able to just piece it together. But I want to go through the honourable mentions. I'll first talk about Andinster, who was the original best player in the world. And I think Andy was the first modern player, is how I'd put it. He was the first player who played the game as a top-down macro style, rather than the kind of style that was really prevalent at the time, which was all focused on playmaking and just basically fighting all the time and winning fights and making good plays. He was basically the exact opposite of Lassus. Lassus was such a fun player to watch. He made these sick plays all the time, constantly up to like, I was going to say hijinks. I don't know why I went into fucking Scooby-Doo language, but he was up to hijinks. It's actually a good way of putting it. He was always up to something, making these big plays. Whereas Andy, you wouldn't think of him for his flashy plays. That's not how I remember Annister anyway. But I do remember Annister as someone who won a world championship and was regarded as the best player on the planet for a very long time until a certain someone usurped him, Game of Thrones style. Andy, obviously his career never quite recovered to the same levels, and he struggled in later years, I think, and is now just chilling in the SML. Still a world-class player, no doubt about it, but never quite reached those same peaks. But whenever you're talking about sort of best players in jungle, you need to remember Annister, I think. Just a quick one to mention as well is Degars, who had a very short time at the top in his time with Cog Red and TSM, but that time at the top was insanely good. Still probably the most incredible Thor mechanics I've ever seen. Made that god look like the best god to ever exist. Just a beast, absolute beast player. And it's a shame his career wasn't longer. Then on to Scream, who is a player who's been consistently one of the best North American junglers throughout his time playing. World's winner with E United, you know, really high finisher wherever he plays. Last season was rough for him, not on a team this season. I think he was one of the hardest done by when it comes to the roster apocalypse that happened over this off-season. Would not surprise me to see him in a team in the near future. Very, very good player. And yeah, probably the best North American jungler for the last few years. Ice Ice Baby, the catalyst behind Rival success. A very underrated player, I think. Easy to look at his plays and think they're a bit of a head scratcher, but again, Rival just played for the team fights, and it meant that sometimes he'd make some weird plays in the laning phase and all of this kind of stuff, and it might look like he's up to some weird shit. But yeah, he was really, really underrated and a massive part of how Team Rivals was so successful. A wild card, I think is the right term for Ice Ice. Yeah, you never really know what you're getting out of him. Unfortunately, not in the league anymore, you know, SML as well, back with the accounting department, old Rival team. Good to see them back and good to see them playing quite well again. But again, it's hard to say some of the best of all time when they had, you know, it's not quite the same way as Deathwalker, who, when he was at his peak, when Rival were at their peak, and he was like the best in his role, even when Ice Ice was at his peak, it still wasn't quite up to the same level as other junglers in Europe at the time. Cherio, let's talk about Cherio, one of my all-time favourite players, and had the single saddest moment I've ever seen in a Smite match when they lost that 5th game against PK, and he collapsed backwards in his bed, and I nearly cried. One of the greatest minds that Smite has ever had. He thinks about the game so intensely. You hear the commentators talk about it before, that they see Cherio after they won by 20k and he'd be walking around scratching his head like, oh, looking like they've just lost horribly, because he's always thinking about the mistakes that he made and how he wants to improve. He wants to win more than just about any other player out there. I think he was so good for that Space Station Renegades team over the last 2 years. He was a big part of their success, and it's not surprising to me to see that the only Warriors have been struggling without a similar player who runs the map in the same way that he does. Every timer, every invade, where people should be all the time, always ticking in his head. And it made his teams very strong. And you saw it back in the day with the old Sanguine teams, where they used to run three Guardians, 2 Hunters, and everyone used to kind of mock it as this like cheese strategy, this niche thing, and then it would beat them, and it would beat them, and it would get to Worlds even. A team that no one thought would even make it through the gauntlet got all the way to Worlds against some much better teams on paper, because, they found their way of playing, and Cherio executed it so well. And, this is what thinking about the game does for you. If you manage to find something new and, difficult to deal with, then you can end up taking results that you would never have a hope at without that. I would love to see him get a ring, would love to see him come back to the league. Obviously, it has a lot of personal stuff going on with military service and stuff in Egypt. So yeah, a bit of a sad one. Would love to see him back in the league as soon as possible. A brilliant player. Sam for soccer. I'm going to say much the same about Sam as I did about Fun. Okay, in a few years, we might be seeing him as the greatest of all time if he keeps it up, because he is, I would say, in terms of just, if someone said, who's the best player in the league at the moment? I say Sam. He wins the most games by himself. I think teams have had a really good time against the Dragons when they've shut down Sam. That has been, to me, the key to success against the Dragons, is if you don't let Sam do his thing, they aren't the same team without him. He is just so dangerous. You give him any room and he will just win a game like that. Bam! Just suddenly he's like 8-1, and you're like, what the fuck happened? And he comes across as a really nice guy, like a really easy guy to team with. Very dry sense of humor. His Twitter makes me laugh a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Sam, and I think that there's a reason why he's so feared in the league, right? Because he is dangerous. He doesn't play anyone else's game. He plays Sam mode, which is, pick a hyper carry, play for hyper carry, full damage everything. He's not building like these tanky control style junglers. He's building full damage everything. But that's not to say that he can't do that. I mean, in the Invitational before Worlds last year for Ghost, he was playing like Odin jungle, which to me seems like heresy. It's like having Lionel Messi in your team and playing him as your goalkeeper, because, you've got Sam for Soccer on your team. Give him Mercury, give him Humbats, give him whatever he wants, rather than an Odin. But again, he won, they won, he crushed. Very, very dangerous player. World's MVP as well, let's not forget, on a team that had no right to winning that league, that world title, but they did. And the very last fight that won the entire thing was ended by Sam. He loop-de-looped on them, 2-man Hun Batsol on the carries that had beads down. They die instantly. Game over. Wins the game on the spot. Won a world championship right there. And to win the MVP title against how well people like Neil and stuff were playing, can't say much more than that. Okay, Captain Twig. Probably the most underrated player throughout Smite's history. Actually, I say probably. No, he is the most underrated, underappreciated player to ever touch the game. I don't understand how people can see that someone has been to more lands than any other player. He has been, on top teams throughout his career and still think, oh, he was carried. That doesn't happen. If you're a team with 4 good players and 1 crap player, you don't win. That's not how it works. I will not tolerate this slander against Twig this whole time. Twig just doesn't play for himself. He plays for the team. And sometimes that looks ugly. Sometimes that means dying and getting out of position and initiating when they've all got all of their beads and kit up. And you die for it. But someone has to do it. He's just a team player. And he's also, when you talk about the best minds of the game, you've got to think of Twig. There is a reason why his teams always do so well, especially when he's in the jungle. And that's because he is organized. He is smart. He is on it. He knows where he needs to be, where he should be, where they can exert pressure. And I think the Camelot Kings this year has proved it better than anywhere else. I think him and Genetics are like kindred spirits. They just constantly want to roam the map and just be in places to just assert their pressure. They just want to say, I am here, I'm going to make your life a misery, I'm going to invade your stuff. And it means that you end up with games like their game against the Leviathans. Game one of their game set against Leviathans, there was like one team fight in the entire game, and it was like 25 minutes into the game, but the Camelot Kings were already like 10k ahead just because of this sheer pressure and organization. And I think this year is finally starting to show that to some people. I think they're finally starting to appreciate, oh, okay, you know, maybe Twig runs quite a tight ship, you know, maybe it's like quite good to have a player who's really on it like that. And he's made Naja look good. Naja, who I would say is in my bottom 5 gods in the game at the moment, and he plays it like one of the best picks in the jungle, getting it banned. And it's because he's playing it his style, how he knows it works, you know? Naja is very good for picking off single targets. It's playing it like Splice used to back in Season 5, you know? Find anyone, whether it's a tank or not, and just kill them. Roll as a bit of a death squad and just kill them. So, just such an underrated player, such underappreciated. Having said all of that positive stuff, you do also have to face the negative stuff that, you know, for all I say he plays for the team and stuff like that, he can be a sloppy player. And I think when people think of Twig, the memories that spring to mind are things like Thanatos in Game 1 against NRG, Season 3 World Finals, where he missed execute after execute. Even then, though, this is kind of to further my previous point, he finished with like 10 kills, you know, double execute on a Titan defense. Like, he turned it around, but at the same time, I think that's what people always appreciate with him, is that they always think of when it comes to Twig, is that this kind of ever so slightly sloppy style, and it means that when it comes to the crunch, sometimes he just falls that bit short, which is why he's also lost more World Championship finals than anyone else. Just little tiny plays, like at the end of one of the games against SK in Season 6, playing the Guan jungle, he blinks, and he blinks just into the tail end of a Jing channel and just gets blown up. And the fight is over instantly. Doesn't get to get any of his cooldowns off. And, you know, he himself has said, you know, like, what was I doing? All of that kind of stuff. Just thought he could dodge it. But I think, unfortunately, that's the legacy that Twig's going to live with, is that people thinking of that kind of stuff when they think of him. So, yeah. To not include him on this list would be heresy, but he also doesn't get the top spot. Okay, now really get into the business end of things. Cuvo Fred. The very first Smite game I ever watched was before qualification to the Smite launch tournament had even happened. That's how far back we're talking. Cuvo Fred was in that game with Trix Tank and Game Hunter. He has been around forever. For as long as professional Smite has existed, he has been there. He has had one of the most interesting careers to talk about, because it has not all been sunshine and roses for him. There have been some real ups and downs, and some real like reinventions of himself. He's a player I could talk about forever because he's so interesting and the way that he's evolved his game. So to talk you through the story of his sort of career, you go from Season 0 TSM team, who crush all opposition on the way to winning the launch tournament title. Best team there by a mile. And the way they played as a team was a big part of that, and Cuvo was a big part of that. From that point onwards, they enter the dark zone of Smite for me, where they basically became chokers. That's all I can describe it as. I loved this team, and I supported them for a very long time, but Jesus Christ, it was not easy being a Paradigm fan. So when I talk about this team, I talk about Paradigm, TSM, kind of Enix, I think they were called. I'm not sure if that's right. Orbit. They had a ton of different sponsors, so, you know, all of those names. You know the players I'm talking about. Cuvo, Lobster, Trix, Fumbles, Alia, blah, blah, blah. That was not an easy team to support, because as soon as it felt like it mattered, they just threw it all away. Look at Season 1, they didn't even qualify for Worlds. Season 2, they face off against Enemy, and they lose. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Enemy were a much better team than people gave them credit for. But this is a team who just beat Epsilon to get to the World Championships, and now they're losing to Enemy, and they just basically lost in picks and bans. Their drafting was atrocious. Khepri was very clearly becoming one of the strongest picks at that tournament, and they thought, oh, you know, we'll draft Thanatos to counter it, despite the fact that Thanatos was terrible at that time. You know, it's like, just ban the Khepri instead. And they lost 3-0, I'm pretty sure, as well. And put it that way, when Rafa himself said that when he saw when he knew that they were through to the final, them being Epsilon, and he saw that Paradigm had lost the enemy, he was like, okay, we've just won. Yeah, they choked that year. Season 3, that was the year of the gauntlet where they went from a really good team to losing like every single game. Apart from when it mattered to send Jeff and Barra through, send through that Luminosity team, then they suddenly turned on the Jets, and then they suddenly remembered, hey, we're actually quite good at Smite, we should play that. They just choked and choked and choked. And I think Fred was quite bad for that as well. As much as I liked him as a player, he was a culprit for that big time. So then we move on to Season 4, and this is where things change. The Team Dignitas squad formed, and Fred flipped a switch. He went from this player who should have been better than he was to a player who was, in my opinion, better than adapting for a period in European Smite. And I do not say that lightly. He was the best jungler in the world, in my opinion, at that time. He played so well and would just define metas. He basically started the Raven jungle thing, which eventually ended up with Raven being reclassified as an assassin. That Dignitas team was so dangerous, and the way he played, he was so slippery, be in, out, and he was so hyper-focused on killing the carries, which is a style that he still plays to this day, and played to a especially strong effect on PK last season, where, you know, he would find whoever the key player was on the other team, he would be there and shut him down. That's why Raven was so good for him, because Raven is extremely good at that. It's basically impossible to get a Raven off you once he's initiated. So he basically reinvented his style of play in that team and became a beast. And it was so good to watch, to finally see him become the player that we all known he could have been this whole time. And then he continued this strength. Although Dignitas, like I said previously, had some really rough periods, he continued his strong level of play, I think. And I'm not going to lie, when the Team Dignitas team in Season 6 didn't come together very well and never really amounted to anything, I thought we lost Cuvo's chance to get a World Championship title. And it was really disappointing, because I thought if there are, you know, top 3 players that deserve one, it's him. Fast forward a year, and him and PK go on the most ridiculous run you've ever seen, and he freaking punches the shit out of his chair on his way to carrying that team to a world title. He played so well in that tournament, man. He absolutely crushed it. Him and Paul together looked unstoppable, and he got his ring. He finally got his ring after all of this time of being the second best, you know, playing second fiddle to adapting. And then, you know, even when he was better than their team wasn't qualifying, you know, he was always the nearly man. And to see him finally win it and to be so pumped about it, to finally get that title, could not be happier for him. And it must feel like such a weight off his chest, because that was always the thing that hovered over his career, the same way that people still talk about Twig these days. The only thing he hasn't done is won a world title, and now he has, and I was so happy for him. But unfortunately, he isn't the greatest player of all time, which means that he comes second on this jungle list. And now moving on to number 1. Now, this won't exactly be the hardest of my picks to guess. It's adapting, and I struggle to hear many arguments that it isn't, because there's a reason why he's known as the greatest player of all time. The man basically redefined Smite. He played it such a way that team as a whole changed Smite. But even within that team's dominance, that team's strength, he was the one. You know, he was, in Matrix terms, he was the one. Like you see in just little things as well. Adonis, if you remember him, has an announcer pack, and when someone's on a kill streak, he goes, "All right, adapting, calm down." Like, that's how kind of the level of ingrained it was, that when someone's doing well, it's adapting. He has the most kills in the league by a mile, and he hasn't even played this season, and didn't play like Season 1 or before to the launch tournament, and he's still hundreds and hundreds of kills ahead. The way I think about him is similar to how I talk about Sam now, where if you're not shutting down adapting, you're doing something wrong, because if you're not shutting him down, he's winning the game. I think, to me, one of the most iconic pieces of commentary of all time comes from Bart. Comes from Bart when they were playing, Epsilon were playing Cloud9, Game 5, he's whipped out this random Fenrir pick out of nowhere, and he is just running it. If you want to see a game as to why people are so scared of adapting, watch Game 5, Epsilon C9, and to quote Bart, someone's got to stop adapting in the backline, he's going to kill everybody. And that was just how it went. If you weren't stopping him, he was killing everyone. And it was so difficult for teams to face. And there's a reason why that team went back to back and why they're known as the greatest team of all time. And he was a massive part of it. Even when Epsilon NRG started to go past their peak, moving onwards, he was still such a menace. And what I think has been really impressive watching him in the most recent years is that he's not the same adapting he used to be, you know? Back in last year, playing for Radiance, he was not playing the same way that he used to. He moved on from his hyper carry sort of style and was like, you know what, let's just pick Circuit, build a kind of tanky, high cooldown, and he found success that way as well. So having been the best hyper carry player forever, he then was like, oh, you know, I'm just going to play a new style. And I'm also going to win with that as well. And we're going to come into Worlds a second seed, you know. Admittedly, that team didn't quite make it all the way. But ever since they beat Cloud9, he has been the undisputed best player in the world, because coming into that game, that was the thing, right? Anster and Adapting, they were the best players in the world, and that was sort of just agreed. And so it was like, who is going to come out on top? And then you had Adapting just run the game, game 5, the winning game, and from that point the torch was passed, and it never really got passed back. Just as good as it gets, has probably played the best Smite that's ever been played. So yeah, harsh for the other junglers trying to get on this list, but basically if you're not adapting, then, you know, it's always going to be a struggle. I think Harrowin summed it up best in their video about adapting, where normally you would call, hey, you know, you say Poseidon is rotating, Apollo is rotating, look, let's kill this Discordia here. But when it comes to adapting, it's adapting's rotating, adapting's here. Watch out, adapting's in the air. You never referred to him by god name. It was by person name. And that has got to be a level of respect that very few players can command. All right, mid time. And the first thing I want to say about mid is that the current crop of mids that we have in the SPL is so stacked. So stacked. I think it's the best role that we have at the moment. There is just talent coming out from every orifice. God, what an awful sentence. There are talent all over the gaff, and even the players that I originally had down as some of the weaker mids in the league, like Venenu, has suddenly become one of the best in the league. He has just had an unbelievable season, and he wasn't even in the sort of top of the list at the beginning. So yeah, the talent in the current crop is incredible, and if one of those would go on to be the best in the league, the best of all time, would not be surprised at all. So let's go back in time to away from the current crop to the old school best ofs, where you have like the Boosh, for example, who is probably one of the cleanest mechanical players I've ever seen. Went deathless for such a long time in Cog Red's ridiculous run up to Season 1 Worlds. Obviously, his career never really went much further than Season 1. He was in that Season 2 Luminosity super team that actually sucked ass, and then never really played much after that. So, you know, obviously not putting him in the running for the greatest of all time, but like Degas, I feel like they need to mention him because of how dominant he was when he was at the top. And now on to MLC Stealth, the original mid lane carry, which makes me laugh that is initials at MLC, because that just works so perfectly. The carry throughout Smite has always been the Hunter, right? Right, that's how most teams play, not Cog Prime. When you have someone as mechanically skilled and as gifted in just making the big game-changing plays as MLC Stealth, they recognized very early on that he was their win condition, which is why when you saw Cog Prime on their way to victory, Barra just basically played Anhur every game, because, you know, if you can drop a massive slow in the middle of a team fight and make it easier for Stealth to hit his stuff, then that's a pretty good deal to me. So he was just the original damage dealer, kill getter. I don't want to support the team, I want to get the kills. And that might sound selfish, but it works. And there is nothing wrong with setting up for a strong carry, you know. And that is what Stealth was. Stealth was just a beast. He, I think, suffered really badly from the splitting up of Cloud9, because the team kind of seemed to like it was going to go in two directions. You had Andy moving off with the sort of young crowd, his friends like the Boosh and Snoopy, Eonic, that kind of Cog Red young style, and then you would have thought you'd have the older section like the Barras and the Jeff Stealth with Stealth, but instead Barra decided to stay with Andy. I think, you know, considering that Andy was the best player in the world at the time, he wanted to stick with him, and basically it left Stealth kind of on a bit of an island. And it started to move into a style of play where the Hunters were, you know, back to being dominant, and everyone wanted to be Zatman, they wanted to be Barracuda, they wanted to be Allied, they wanted to be all of the best Hunters. And so it meant that when he was moving on to teams where it wasn't sort of based around him in the same way, I think he struggled, and he still saw himself as one of the best mids in the world, rightfully so. But it meant that when he was on sort of lower end teams, I think there was, allegations of him being a difficult teammate. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that he knows, or he knew that he was kind of almost too good to be there. I think he's one of those that I think I wish he'd stuck it out for longer. I really do, because I think even when he wasn't on as good teams, he still looked really good. Team Allegiance, they had a really good run and then a massive drop off. But even when they were dropping off, he still looks good. To quote Polar Ben Mike, that's the cannon, baby. He still had so much potential, I think. And I would have loved to see, like, imagine him playing nowadays. You've seen teams move back to this mid lane carry style all over again. It's exactly what PK did last year with Paul. It's what a lot of Renegades did, and Space Station last year with Dardes. Radiance did a lot of it as well with Big Man Tings. You've seen it a lot more where teams are building around their mid laners. And I just feel like in a meta like this, it would suit him down to the ground. But yeah, has to be talked about in the list of best mids ever, because his Scylla performance at Season 1 Worlds was just spectacular. Truly spectacular. There's a reason why it's already been covered in like 2 or 3 videos on my channel, and might still be covered in yet another one where I do a story of the skin behind the cognitive Scylla skin. So that's the kind of level of player we're talking about. Another quick mention of the best. He played on a lot of very, very strong teams and was very good at his time. Unfortunately, I think he will always be remembered for the Anubis mid in the Eager comp, but I felt I need to mention him because he was a very top player for a long time. There's a reason he was called the best, man. Very, very classy player. I also want to talk about Wolfie, who again is on my list of the most underappreciated players in the league. People seem to have this recollection of him being like an average player on Rival. I do not agree. Ra was permabanned against him for like 2 years straight. If you watch the game where Deathwalker played Ares and like watch the full VOD of it, it just as easily could have been a Ra snipe montage, because he just does not miss on Ra. And he was so consistent on that team. I just do not think he ever got the respect he deserved for being such a beast. Unfortunately, now he's going to be tarnished with the brush of having gone back to the Pro League on that Obey team. And that Obey team were not very good. They were which is unfortunate, because I think that's going to kind of tarnish his reputation, but I don't think it should, because he was an absolute monster on that Rival team. And I think people remember Deathwalker very well. They remember how good he was, but they do not remember how dominant Wolfie was. He was also a Janus beast. Do not forget his Janus. Watch that game with, if you watch the set where they do that drop ship with the Janus, the Ares come to the Janus portal, watch that full set and watch Wolfie, because he was unstoppable. Absolute beast of a player. And I think it's a real shame to see him not appreciated in the same way that other mids are. Now, Pretty Prime, one of my all-time favorite players, one of the most chilled human beings you will ever see in your entire life. He is someone who I think, when I think of the move to America, I think it's done a lot of good for the game. I think the game has grown and improved as a scene as a result of the move. But when I think about the players left behind, Prime is always the one that I think of. Because, he's got a baby girl out there, he's got his family out there. He can't be moving across the US. That's just not how it works. And I think it is a crying shame, because when I think about good players over the course of, years and years, I don't just think about the spikes where, okay, they were the best player in the world at this time. You also think about those players who were just never bad, who were always right at the top. And that is Prime. That is Prime down to the ground. Prime, for as long as Smite has been around, has just been such a class player. World Finals with Titan, his run on the various Twig teams moving forwards, and he was just so consistent. Played in Obey's run to the World Finals, played so well. And he's one that I wish had got a ring. I really think he deserved it. Just played like an absolute monster. And I think you see it most clearly in the games when they're playing against Eager, for example. And Best is playing Anubis and not having an impact. And then you've got Prime on the other hand, just running the show. Such a good player, and by all accounts, such a good teammate. Everyone who's teamed with him has said how lovely he is he is the person that you see on the outside. That is him. There's no kind of secret other side to him. Rafa himself said he was so excited to get to team with Prime. Twig has always said that he's the favorite mid laner that he's played with. There's a reason why he's so well loved in the scene. Yeah, I really do wish he was still in the very top of the league. And, you know, maybe one day he will be. He's still around. He's still playing in the SCC. I really want to see him back because when he's at his best, he was so clean. And right, onto the real meat and potatoes here. This was close for me. And I can't believe I'm saying that because my number one, I would have had nailed on as the greatest of all time for forever. And I'm kind of giving away who it is. But Paul's recent performance nearly swayed me. And I think if he goes on to have any better performances moving forward, he will be the best of all time. I think if you're talking about mechanically the best players to ever play, my vote is for Paul. I don't think there has been a better mechanical player ever. I think when it just comes to hitting stuff, pressing his buttons, just doing damage, understanding how gods want to play and playing them to their max, it's Paul. He's the sort of player that makes me so glad I was never a pro because he would have destroyed me. Like, he's just so naturally gifted at the game. He just gets it. He just gets how it works. And he's so infuriatingly chill about it as well, because it's like, oh, you know, maybe I'm good at Scylla. I don't really know, to be honest. I'm just like, but the reason why I didn't put him as number one is mainly just because of, we'll put it this way, he nearly got number one because of his top performances. When you see him at his best, he is as good as it gets in Smite. Like, his performance at the most recent Worlds was up there with the most incredible performances you've ever seen. Ever. Of all of the games played. Ever in Smite history. That was Paul. But you've also got to remember the regular season for PK and SK was bang average. He was playing console for a lot of time. Basically, the teams that he's on never really seemed to be top teams for a while. And that's not because of Paul. That's not like really a complaint about him. But compared to someone like Aaron, who was on the top team throughout, crushing week in, week out, and giving those top quality performances, I don't think Paul does the same. Obviously, he's still amazing week by week. Like, this year, he's decided that he's going to be the best Janus in the league, having not played it a single time last year. He suddenly just decided, hey, I'm the best in the world at Janus as well. So it's not like he's having poor performances, but at the same time, you know, comparing to someone who, you know, who finishes seasons top by absolute miles, it's hard to kind of compare the two. But in terms of impact that a single player can have, a single mid laner can have, I don't think there are many players better than Paul. Such a nice guy as well, like super chilled, does not have any ego, which he would very rightfully have if he wanted to. Just presses his buttons better than just about anyone else in the league. And the fact that he didn't win MVP breaks my heart. I mean, he's the only player who has his own montage made on my channel. I think that kind of sums up, you know, the kind of level of play we're talking about here. But unfortunately, he's not Yaman, and therefore he's not number one, which is much the same as for the junglers. These Adapting and Yaman were kind of already booked in as my 1 and 2, and they have been for forever, because not only were they amazing and had these really high ends, they managed to maintain that high end for years and years and years, and, you know, over various world championships, all the way down to the, you know, their lowest lows. I think Yaman is the single most consistent player I ever watched. Do you remember that game where Yaman had a stinker? No, me neither. And the thing is about Yaman is that he was kind of in the background for a while. People didn't really appreciate how good he was, myself included, for a very long time, because everyone was watching the Adapting show. Everyone was watching as Adapting redefined what Smite was and pushed stats and figures. Like, so put it this way, Adapting was like, I don't know if you've ever seen any of those football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, stats, where it's like football before and after Messi and Ronaldo, or like especially Messi, where, you know, you'd have these stats where it's like, you know, most goals in this championship, most goals in the Champions League, most goals in a season, blah, blah, blah. And before it was really varied, most assists was one person, most goals was another. And then since Messi and Ronaldo have come in, they have just taken over every single stat for everything. And, you know, football's just not the same after them. That's kind of what it was like with Adapting and Yaman, where... But with Adapting, everyone was watching the Adapting show as he got kill on kill on kill, but no one was really paying attention to the fact that, hey, everyone who's killing is at like 30% health. How did that happen? And then you watch it back and you're like, oh, Janus one-shot him with his ult and his 2 and then got out for free and then did the same on someone else. He was quietly being the best player in the world. I don't think people really noticed it. There was if you go back and watch a player spotlight from ages ago, Hazer himself says it, where...
I don't think it's a very popular opinion, but I felt like Yaman was maybe the best player in the world for the last little while. He's been so consistent. He's played anything. I mean, you can put him on Chiron, you can put him on Janus, you can put him on you know, anything which does damage, and he's going to do a lot of work for that team.
And when you go back and watch the old NRG games, it's hard to disagree because you're watching, expecting, adapting to do his thing, and then you're like, wait a minute, Yaman is like 8-1 right now. You go back and watch their set against Obey, and although Emilito won the MVP award, it was really close to being Yaman's. And I think Emilito tipped it because he was the clutch player. He was the one that turned the tides when things went badly, whereas Yaman was just sort of contributing to why things were going well when things were going well for them. But man, he was just so good and so consistent for so long. By all accounts, a good teammate as well, chilled guy. I just think for someone to be performing at that level of consistency for that long at so many different events and world championships, for me, he has to be my number one. And when he bowed out of professional Smite with issues with his mental health, I think the scene lost something that day. And I don't think the scene has ever really been the same since. I think he also served as a very poignant reminder of the fact that the players go through a ton of stress. I know you might not think it, oh, they just play video games for a living, you know, how's that stressful? But they put their heart and souls into this, and, you know, they put themselves under such emotional pressure. So I wish him well. I hope that he's doing all right these days, but I really do think he was the best mid laner of all time. Christ, this has been a long ass video, and we're only just getting to the supports. First support I want to talk about is Jeff Hindler, the people's champion, one of the all-time favourites. Jeff was one of my favourite players to watch, and I think he embodied the old school style of support. Supports used to be lane helpers. They'd be there peeling for their carries. They did the old school honourable support thing, honourable dueling before all of this stuff like invading buffs happened and all of it. I can't be having that. We go for the honourable rules of fighting 2v2 in duo lane, and we pick Bacchus and we pick Geb and we pick no pressure because we're peeling for our carries. That is Jeff Hindler. Jeff would die for one of his carries in a heartbeat. He was ever on the map stealing objectives. He was the quintessential old school support. And that was his greatest strength and his biggest downfall, because unfortunately support changed. Unfortunately for Jeff, that is. The support role is pretty unrecognizable from what it is now. The honourable 2v2 days are over. Nowadays, supports are basically playing as second junglers, and this was a style that just did not suit Jeff at all. And it's a shame because the role changed more and more away from how Jeff wanted to play and into these styles that really did not suit him. Like, it just looked so uncomfortable seeing him invading buffs at level 1. I don't think anyone thought that looked right. And unfortunately, that change happened at the same time as supports became more and more important in the game. Whereas before, it was always junglers running the show and setting the pace of the game. I think in seasons 5, 6, particularly 6, was the first time we really saw supports be, in my opinion, the most important person on the map. They became the pace setters. They decided where the team was going to be at any given time. They decided where they were going to fight. And that wasn't Jeff's thing. Jeff was used to playing with someone like Andy who would be doing that. That's what Anderson's role was in that C9 team. He was the pace setter, the telling people where to go. Jeff was the I'm going to support whatever's happening sort of player. And so it was a real shame to see the shift in styles and how it happened as supports became more and more influential to a game. And I think it's a big reason why Space Station, as they were in season 6, had such a horrible season, because they weren't the worst team in the league, right? Because they would get leads almost every single game. They would look good for the first 20 minutes, but then when the team fighting came around, they fell off super hard. And I think Jeff was a big part of that, unfortunately. He just wasn't playing the game the same way anymore. He was basically, the game moved on and left him behind. You know, to quote the grandpa in Simpsons, whose name I forget, you know, I used to be with it, but then it changed, and it'll happen to you. That's what happened to Jeff, and it's happened to a ton of other players. So it's a real shame because he was a class player, really fun to watch, lovable guy, very, very nice guy by all accounts as well. Obviously, him and Bauer had a great relationship together. Good team player, but unfortunately left behind by the times, I'll say. Next on to Trixtank, another one of my personal favourite players, and he has a very similar story to Kivo Fred, and that's not just because they're like best mates and, you know, like live together and all of this stuff. He was a player who was really, really good. In fact, probably the best support on the planet in the very early days of Smite, especially during TSM's run to greatness. And then he fell off really hard, really hard. When that team started falling behind, a lot of it I felt was down to Tricktank. He just, when it moved away from these warrior supports that he was so used to playing back into the kind of old school style of Guardians, the Jeff Hindler style, I felt like he couldn't handle it. But then again, just as Fred did, Season 4 came around, we got a new player. He is a new person, and suddenly he is amazing again. He was just running the show for Dignitas. And I think he's a big part of why Dignitas was so successful. He was everywhere, and he was suddenly back at the forefront of being one of the best supports in the world. And this was a very good time to do it, because like I said, from Season 4 onwards, the importance of the support just got higher and higher and higher. He was someone who loved to fight, loved to scrap, loved to team fight, and that style really came into vogue as the seasons went on. And Season 6, I think you can basically look at who the best supports were by how the teams finished, and Dignitas did well that season. Admittedly, bad Worlds run, as is tradition with that team, but strong support, strong start. And they were unbeaten for a while with Dignitas. They were top of the league for a very long time because they were very good, and because Trickstank was very good. Such a fun player to watch, one of the most infectious personalities in Smite. In the farming of DM Brandon video, he cracks me up every time. He's a great commentator as well when he came on as a guest caster. Just such a fun guy to be around, and even more entertaining when he forgets to turn off his stream. Yeah, brilliant player. I hope to see him back in the league one day. Not impossible. I know he's finishing school fairly soon, so he pretty wants to start a career. Careers, who cares about those? Come back to Smite, move over to America, team with Fred again, Let's make it happen. Now on to Emilzy, who I think, again, when you're talking about the minds of Smite, has to be talked about. I think probably one of the most mechanically gifted supports we've ever had. He was a win condition in his own right. He kind of just... There's something to be said about these players who play the game the way that they want to play it. And Emilzy was one of those. He was like, I think Hell Support is really good, and I'm going to make it good. Lots of other people tried Hell Support and failed horribly because it doesn't seem good. Shouldn't be a good pick. But Emilzy played it so well that he made it a good pick. And that's such a powerful thing where you go from, you have as another enemy team, you have your list of gods that you think are strong and weak and picks and bans and priorities. And suddenly you have a god like Hell who's bottom tier, suddenly get jammed into A tier, and someone you have to think about banning all over again. And it's oh my god, we're not set up for this. We can't be wasting bans on Hell. Hell sucks. Why are we banning Hell? And then he plays Hell Support and crushes you. That's what I really loved about Emilzy. I think he made that Obey team that had such a good run in Season 4 until they hit United. I think he made that team really strong. It was definitely a huge part of their success. And it's funny, he was one that I had tipped from a very young age to be one of the best, because earlier when I was talking about variety, I mentioned a team called Worth Gaming who burst onto the scene, and how the league used to run then. It wasn't a league, it was each week was a tournament. And one team would eventually win, and this Worth Gaming team got really close many times, except they never quite won it until they subbed out their support one day. Their support couldn't be there for some reason, and who stepped in but Emilzy at 14 years old or something. It might have been 12. He was a little diddy little support, and guess what happened that week? They went and won it. And you could see early on that he was just really on it, really smart. He knew what he thought was good and made it happen. Played really cleanly. Yeah, brilliant. There's a reason why he's a lot of people's favorite supports. Very, very fun to watch. Meta breaking sort of player. Yeah, got a lot of respect for him, and I'm glad he's back. He's back. Emilzy's back in the SEC. Whether we'll see him really sort of pick up Smite full-time, I don't know again. Admittedly, he mainly dropped Smite because of his disagreements with the orgs and their sort of predatory practices, leading to, really shoddy arrangements with teams. And that's gone now. The orgs have been kicked out of Smite for those exact reasons. So, obviously his life will have moved on a bit and he will be doing other stuff. But, there's always a chance that you might see him back in the SVL. And I think the support role has the most room for these returning players to come back in, because it's not a deep pool of talent in the support role. Teams have been struggling for a very long time. In fact, it's why Awesome Jake got his break in the first place, was because the list of supports they had as an alternative was just so short. They were just okay, let's give this random guy a go because the others suck. So yeah, maybe we'll see him back. Future Dan back again. The next person I forgot was Neil Marr, Back-to-back Worlds winner, current Worlds MVP, apparently slipped my mind. This is Neil Maher, back-to-back Worlds winner with PK and SK. Worlds MVP, controversially, this year. What more is there to say about Neil? The man is the main character. You may think that you are the main character. You may think that, you're the most important person in your life. But Neil's the main character. He's the protagonist. We're all just NPCs in Neil's world. It used to be the joke that Barracuda had plot armor, but no one has plot armor thicker than Neil. And at the time of filming, the SPL playoffs start tonight. And Only Warriors have gone from being the worst team in the league statistically to finishing top seed in their group. So if they go and win this, that will officially prove that Neil's plot armor is just... What do you do about that? How are you supposed to beat someone who's the main character? Have you ever read a book? The main character always wins. To talk about Neil's playstyle, there's no other way to put it than the ultimate team player. Neil is never playing for himself. He's never playing to look good. He's never playing to boost his stats or anything like that. He is always playing for the team, and specifically the way I think he plays best is for the ultra late game. This is where we saw PK and SK shine. Not so much in their SK run actually, but more in the PK one. Neil might look sloppy in laning phase. He might look, a bit, I was going to say clueless, but maybe that's the wrong word. He might look a bit, you might not know what he's doing some of the time. But when it comes to the ultra late game fights, he is so clean. If you go back and watch PK's world run, look how many times he starts a fight and then somehow gets out with like 1 HP. It's just insane for a team fight, sort of in terms of value. Because you've absorbed so many cooldowns, you've done your job, and you've lived. So you can come back in and cause havoc. And he did this over and over and over. And that's just Neil's playstyle. That's what Neil does. He just plays for these fights. And I said before, actually, where you were at in the video right now, I might not have said it before, but a point that I go on to make is that someone has to do the dirty work. Someone has to do the ugly stuff. And I think Neil does it better than anyone. And then to talk about him as a teammate, you only hear good things really from the people he's teamed with. A bit of the social glue for the team, Some teams kind of struggle if the team isn't working together socially because it makes it difficult to discuss how you work as a team and how you want to change and develop. But by all accounts, Neil's a good guy. So why isn't a back-to-back Worlds winning MVP top of my list? Well, I think because if you look at any of Neil Maher's teams, they've not exactly been regular season all-stars. And I don't think Neil would contest that at all. He was part of that, was it Allegiance? I can't remember what team it was, but they had a horrible run, like really bad, before they would eventually go on to join the team that became SK and PK, which I think was Trifecta when they first got put together. And SK had a very average yearly run. They finished 7th out of 10 before going on to win Worlds. And PK last year, again, regular season, not the same team. Not the team that we saw at Worlds, They're just stomping everyone team. And so it's hard to, really highly rate someone who you spend half the time going, what is he doing? Their team have just lost like 20-0 again. Neil's like 0-15. Like, Neil does not mind dying. And it's one of those things where I think it's a really good trait, but at the same time can look really ugly when over the regular season, he's got like an insane amount of deaths. So I think in terms of kind of week-to-week performance, he's definitely one of the weaker supporters on this list. But when it comes to the top end, what this man can and has achieved, right up there with the very, very best. Okay, now it's my top 3, and these 3 are a level above the rest. And I struggled with this 3. So these 3 aren't in any particular order. Actually, number 1 is in his place, but 2 and 3 are just kind of, they're not in any order. First one I'm going to talk about is Rafa, who I don't think gets enough credit ever. Ever. Because sometimes Smite is more than what you're just seeing in front of you on the screen. Rafa has put together 2 of the strongest teams in Smite's history. Obviously, NRG, the best team of all time. And then this Renegades / Space Station team where I feel like they won't be remembered for being as strong as they are because of their kind of mediocre Worlds performances and coming up against PK and falling short twice. But this team was really good, especially that Renegades team. They came in late to that season, got to MSI, and went undefeated. They didn't drop a single game on their way to winning it. That's how strong that team was. And so if you're saying that Rafa was like, a bit of a bot, then it's the same Captain Twig argument where you're looking for the fancy players that get the kills. You're not looking at the players who do the dirty work, who get the cooldowns, who get the actives, who take the damage. In every team fight, a certain amount of damage will be done either way, and you want the right people to be taking that damage, and that is Rafa. He is the most selfless support we've ever had, because like the man just loves to die. Like he is racing for that record of the most deaths, but there's a reason he's also got the most assists in the league, again by some way, because that Epsilon team, that Energy team, were getting so many kills, and he was such a big part of them. And the Space Station and Renegades teams have gone on to be such strong teams in their own right. He has been such a big captain for those. He's been a massive presence for the game. A lot of people don't like him because they think he's like BM or whatever, but he's just the pantomime villain of Smite. He loves to be the bad guy, the one, going, 3-0, easy win, these guys suck kind of stuff, because it riles the crowd up. It's provocative. It gets the people going. He's the stirring of the pot, pantomime villain style, which I think Smite needs a lot more of, because it's very entertaining, I think. It's been a huge part of Smite, and it's one thing to be a good player, but to be able to make teams that go on to be as successful as they have been, especially including like role swaps, like putting Dardas in the mid lane and stuff like that, that's a big deal to me. And being a good captain at the same time, keeping the mental together. I have so much respect for Rafa. I know this season's been a bit tough on him so far. The Valks aren't exactly hitting home runs at the moment, but I'm sure their time will come. Next up is Aurora, who is one of my personal favourite players to watch because, again, he is one of those who just plays his own game. I think there are some players that are good because they are hardworking, they graft, they grind, and they make themselves into really good sort of mechanical players and all this kind of stuff. And then there are the other players who are just naturally gifted. They just get it. They know where to be, they know what to do, and it just kind of comes fairly naturally to them. And that, to me, is embodied by Aurora. Aurora just knows what he wants to do at all times, and he's so supremely confident with it. Less so in recent seasons, I would say, but back in his prime, in his Splice days, he was a game winner. If I was doing this video back in sort of season 5, I would be putting Aurora as my number 1 pick. But unfortunately, he has kind of struggled the last couple of seasons, I would say. I don't think he's been quite as dominant as he has been previously, which is a real shame because I love watching him at his best. He plays the best Hercules I've ever seen, other than maybe one other player who I'll come to later. But yeah, his Hercules just won games by himself. Like when you see a player get a certain pick banned all year long, that's a sign that that player is just crushing the scene, like really crushing it. And he's just so good. And he's so aggressive. But that's the thing, he doesn't have to play aggressive. He plays like his Ares and his Hercules, super aggressive. But he's also got that other angle, the Gebs and the Kepris and stuff like that. He's just a really complete player, really good teammate. Him and Cyclone have had such a good chemistry for a long time. Yeah, just a class player, and I've got so much respect for him. I want to see him back to his best. The Titans are looking better and better with each coming week. And I can't wait to see the proper Aurora come back, because I know it's not far away. You don't lose that sort of talent. I think within the next year or so, we're going to be seeing Aurora back to his best. And finally, my number 1 pick, and so my pick for the support role, is a player who I think was the best player in the league last season. And there's a reason why he's been to season 4, 6, and 7 world finals, winning one of them. It's obviously talking about Polar Bear Mike. Mike is at the heart of everything that team, that Ghost, Rival, Jade Dragons team, everything that they're doing, it flows through Mike. He has that kind of presence around the map where he just has so much pressure without really doing anything, just by being around. Whereas with other supports, you see them walking around and think, oh, okay, what you doing? You're going to get picked off. You're throwing a bit here. With Mike, it's more like, oh, like you see the shark fin in the water. It's like, oh, okay, I need to watch ourselves here. Mike's around. Just makes such an impact in every team fight. I think his biggest asset is the way that he controls the map. He just single-handedly puts out so much pressure, and that's something that Ghosts are so strong with. They just control the jungle, they control the buffs, and it means that they control when they want to fight. They say, we're going to rotate here, I'm going to fight here, we're going to invade their buff, and we win that fight. And that's what they do. That's what they've done for years. And it's what makes them so oppressive to play against, because within the first sort of 5-10 minutes, you feel like you've already lost because they're everywhere in your jungle and they're beating you and they're just pressing their buttons better than you are. And that's one thing that I think has been a fundamental theme of this team's success throughout the years, is that they just seem to be able to press their buttons better than everyone else. Doesn't really make any sense as to why. They shouldn't be able to do that, but they have been. And like I said, I really do think it all flows through Mike. Like I said about Rafa, there's a lot to be said for someone who's being, they might be a good player, but to also be a good teammate is a massive deal. And you only really notice it when players are sort of bad teammates. But I feel like this team has been the most secure and self-confident team. And a lot of that flows through your captain, This team is so confident in themselves and, for good reason. And I've heard Benji before talk about how he thinks that PBM was the best teammate he's teamed with, It all flows from the top. If you've worked at any company and you've got a shit boss, the team's atmosphere is shit because, negativity flows down and so does positivity. And Mike, I think, brings out the best in his players, along with being sort of the best support, I think, mechanically. He's also one of the best teammates, one of the best in terms of controlling the map. Like I said, I thought last year was the most competitive year we've ever had in Smite, and I think he rose to the top as the best support they've got. God Pool is sort of limitless. I think of his Hercules, but he's also got his Kepri. Fenrir, suddenly made Fenrir support look like a broken pick all over again. Just class player, class act, and a very good mascot for the league, I'd say. And finally, we come on to the Hunters. I think my discussion is mainly going to focus around a kind of a core group of players. So I'm going to give some honorable shout outs to Ataraxia, a very lovable player, played his own jank, played his own weird stuff, and did really well with it. Made it to a few world finals. Unfortunately, never got his ring. But, great guy, great player. Snoopy, I know people don't think of him at the top, but he has been playing at highest level forever. Played in a bunch of different roles. Again, one of those people who just gets the game, He's probably played the most Smite of any pro as well. Like, he has put the fucking hours in, that's for sure. His Vulcan ADC is still the best of all time in that role. So vote MBK, vote as well. Probably not one you thought would feature on this list, but he was a massive part of Rival's success. He was the best player on that PK team in season 6 when that kind of imploded. He was the one who really kept he raised his reputation, continued to have a good season here. Just consistent good play out of him. You know what you're getting, and it's going to be a decent play, even if you can't understand what he's saying half the time. So now we come to the core of my debate, and I think there are 3 players that really spring to mind when it comes to the greatest of all time. I'm going to start by start chronologically, because that's how I've done it before, and start with Zapman. To put it this way, I think it's best summed up his impact on the ADC role when Allied moved from support to ADC. And he basically said, I moved because someone needed to be as good as Zapman. Like, we needed someone, like, they tried to look at ADCs and there was no one who could come close to Zap. In the early days of Smite, he was the ADC and he was the one that people feared, just like a single one-man army, super aggressive, super in your face, hitting everything, carrying games by himself. I think the biggest weakness of Zap has been his teams. He's been on class teams, but they've never quite delivered. I mean, Dignitas got to the finals of the launch tournament, but then after that, it took 3 seasons for him to qualify for Worlds. He was clearly at the top of, the ADCs in his time on Eager, but then after that, went through a bit of a purple patch, didn't quite find his feet again for a while. Was on and off teams, took a break from the game. But then there's the second half to this story where he came back and reinvented the way he plays again. He went from the young jock into the old wise Uncle Iroh type, the quarterback almost, where now his role in the team, I think he's got some of the best shot calling in the league. I know it'll get memed on for, the end calls that he's somewhat responsible for, but his style of play has changed so much. He's now much more of a team player. He's much more kind of the top down, right, we're going to be here on the map, we need to do this call at this time. And when you think about how PK won their most recent world title, it was off the back of the insane shot calling that team produced. That's why the casters gave it to Neil, because they figured he was behind the shot calling. But Paul has said that Zap, I mean, they all obviously call this stuff, but Zap did most of the late game calls. And that's the best macro I've ever seen in all of my years playing Smite. And it's not even close, frankly. So it's hard to judge a player who was right at the top for a very long time and then dipped really badly and then has come back up. And at a time when people would say he's maybe not playing his best Smite, has then won 2 world championships off the back of it. For me, I loved seeing Zap get a ring because I felt he was also in that list of players who had been around for so long, made such a huge impact on the scene. To not have a ring seemed criminal. And for newer players who've come in, you may not appreciate the impact that Zap had on the early days, but Zap was the ADC back in the day. He was the influence of so many players. They all wanted to be Zap Man. Big streamer, big personality in the scene. Obviously, it's since matured. His personality was very different back then. I think he himself has said, apologies to those who hung out with who were burned by Toxic Steve back in the day. But it's been really interesting seeing his career develop, and now to a back-to-back Worlds winner. I don't think any of us, especially Zap, saw that coming. The other player everyone always talks about, you can't talk about Zapman without talking about Barracuda. Barra has he has surprised me big time this year in the last couple of years, because it felt to me like he was one of those, like Zapman, who had his really good peak at the beginning of Smite, and was due to tail off since then. But he's just been on high after high, frankly. He has just gotten better and better. He's playing some really good Smite at the moment, I would say. But the story of Barra goes that he was if Zapman is yin, he's yang, it's the exact opposites to each other, because Zap was ultra aggressive, in your face, wanted to fight. Barracuda was, let's play for team fights, let's play smart, let's play, the cautious way almost. And the two styles clashed really badly, because you'd think that the one getting the solo kills might be the better one, but it was always Barra who I think had more kind of long-term success, obviously with the Worlds win in Season 1, semi-final Season 2. So Barra was always kind of at the best, at the top then. But at that time, he was seen as kind of the supporting cast almost, for the MLC show, Andy, he was just kind of the supporting cast in the background. So when they form this Luminosity team in Season 3 and pick up a whole bunch of rookies with Masked, with Xeno, with Aquarius, and Scary D at that time, then Aquarius, people thought, he's just going to continue on being the kind of, the backup support player. He was not. He reinvented himself massively in Season 3. He turned into hyper carry mode, and when he was at his best, he played brilliantly. He was unstoppable. He was probably the best solo ADC ever. Played Jingwei every time he could get it. Any auto-attack based god that could do work in team fights, he loved it. And he just suddenly flipped this switch where he went into fucking Ultra Instinct. I really cannot describe to you the difference between seasons 0 to 2 Barracuda to seasons 3 and 4, because he just suddenly said, okay, you know what, this team aren't as good, time to carry, time to put the backpack on and do it all myself. And he did. And that's something that's really admirable to me, to be able to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to carry this by myself and change it. Obviously, his teams have not really had the same sort of success since. They've never really come that close. I think the problem for Barra's run is that he's always come up against NRG or Adapting. They knocked out Barra's team 3 years in a row. Season 2 at C9, Season 3, Luminosity, Season 4, Luminosity again in the quarterfinals. They just could not get past Adapting. I think it took 18 games for him to beat Adapting's team, whatever that team was. 18 games! And that's when they weren't playing each other in the same league all the time. So think about how few chances they get to play each other internationally. 18 tries. That's insane. So yeah, it was a tough time for Barra. It really was. But he's really come back from the depths, I would say. I thought this was going to be the sort of tailing off of his career into one of the sort of more average players, but I think he's just managed to maintain a level of play that surprised me. Him and Jake are now a really dominant duo lane. I think Jake might have given him a new lease of life. He's really come out swinging in the last couple of years into this super aggressive lane player that you see today. So whether he's number one, I'm not sure, because we still need to discuss someone who most people would probably say, when they're doing, if this was like a community poll, I think the top pick would be PandaCat. You talk about consistent high level of play, and very few players embody this like PandaCat. So supremely self-confident, and for good reason. Panda has been playing at the highest level. There are a few players that I saw play early on in their careers and twigged, okay, these guys are going to be really good. One of them was Scream, one of them was Scary D, one of them was Paul, and one of them was PandaCat. And obviously there have been others, but those are the 4 that I really backed. And I think all 4 of them are Worlds winners now, so some of them 2 times World winners, so, not bad. But I remember watching Panda and Scream at the same time when I twigged these guys were going to be good, was during the Epsilon Invitational, which is just after they won their world title in their Season 2. And then Enemy were a new team. The Enemy that had made it to the final before had disbanded and reformed. And suddenly PandaCat and Scream, 2 really young players, were in. but they were so good and they were so confident. You see these young players often be kind of intimidated playing against, especially legendary names like NRG, but they had no fear at all. Jesus Christ, they were not intimidated in the slightest. They got in there and they played so well, and that enemy team went on to have a really good season. Looked really strong, and then obviously moved on to E United in season 4 with Mike, and the rest is history. 1 Worlds win, 3 Worlds final appearances. There's a reason why him and Mike have stuck together so long, because they've come to trust each other's level of gameplay, and rightfully so. I think Panda has been potentially the most consistent player of all time. Just does not seem to have bad games, and sometimes he'll have games where he won't influence it in the same way as, you know, you sometimes see him, but that's not saying a bad game. You never see those games where he's just throwing or feeding. And there is so much to be said to that. Him and Mike have been called the Kobe and Shaq, and I don't know what that reference, like, I don't know what Kobe and Shaq together looked like, but I gather they were quite good, so I can see the resemblance, and, you know, it's hard to argue with a statement like that when they have been at such a... That's the thing, I cannot drill into this enough. There are players who have good periods, but then there are some who are so consistently good for such a long time. It's one thing to be a good player. It's another thing to be a good player for 5 years straight. And that's what Panda has done, and I think will continue to do so. And that's the thing, is that I can't see any sort of negative trend to his gameplay at all. If anything, he gets better with each season. I can only really see him going up from here, which is a crazy thing to say. It'll be interesting to see, though, how he copes should that team break up, because that team have been kind of, especially him and Mike have been together since season 4. And we're now season 8. So it'll be interesting to see how he would look on like a brand new team, for example. But, you know, obviously we can't see that. But yeah, you know, it's hard to argue against someone like Panda. So out of those 3, who am I going to pick? You know, the old guard who have reinvented themselves in modern times, or super consistent, high-performing newer players? Drumroll, please. My pick is none of them. There's a fourth. Imposter was among us after all, and that is Cyclone Spin, who was going to get my pick. I thought I wanted to include Cyclone Spin in this team because there are very few players who have played at the level that he has for as long as he has, and also been known as the best in their role in 2 positions. In fact, I can't think of many, if any, other players who have done that. Cyclone went from being the best solo laner in the world at one point, role swaps, and I know you might think role swaps are kind of, you know, fine-ish because you see people like Yarkor do it and make it look easy, and like Panda Cat go into mid lane and make it look easy. But they're not. They are really not easy, and in fact, the vast majority of role swaps have gone horribly wrong. Most role swaps end up swapping back within like a season, and they don't look good in that time. So for a player to go from 2 very different roles in solo to hunter, from your frontline bruiser to your backline DPS, and to be considered the best in the world at various points at that role, that's unheard of. To be the best solo laner and the best hunter that's crazy to me. And again, Cyclone is one of those who you just cannot point to a period in his career where you say he's been bad. He was so good in Splice's World's winning run, and he's not really looked back since. You know, him and Aurora together have been such a deadly duo lane. He looked good on Radiance as well, especially you think about the qualifiers for Worlds, that MSI tournament. He looked so good there, just winning games, slamming crit with everything like that. Feel a bit harsh giving him the best ADC because I would say he hasn't been the best ADC of the last few years. But to me, it just felt wrong to not include Cyclone in like a 5 players of history kind of thing, because he has been everywhere and he has been such a beast throughout. Such a mechanically skilled player. And like I said, it just blows my mind that someone can be the best in ADC and the best in solo, because the difference in those roles is staggering. Most players don't get to be the best in their role in one role, and he's done it twice. So that's why I'm giving it to Cyclone. I'm sorry to the other 3. You all deserved it probably, maybe a little bit more, but it's Cyclone because it's my list, so fuck you. No, I'm joking. What is this? A second Future Dan interruption? After I recorded that section on my dream team of ADCs, I kind of think I didn't do enough justice to a lot of the people I talked about. And it may have been something to do with the fact that my camera was rapidly running out of memory. I had to wrap it up quickly. But now the future Dan has come, and I don't think I quite summed it up like I would like to. So the first thing I want to talk about is Zap and Barra. And I don't think I really summed up enough just how influential these guys have been on Smite as a whole. Like, if Smite is the USA, these guys are two of the founding fathers. These were two of the original streamers, like the ones that started the very base of Smite, like with Lassus and stuff like that. These guys began that side of Smite. And every single player, I think, at some point, like who's playing professionally now, will have been influenced by them in some way. And that might sound like an exaggeration to every single player, but I mean it. Like, every single player, I really do think, has had some sort of influence from those two, because they have run the show for years and years and years, especially in ADC. And maybe it's harder to see now because ADC is a very strong role. There's a lot of, up and comers. Like, you got people like Yarkor coming in for his very first season and popping off. With a bit of recency bias, it's hard to see the impact that these two have had. But the Zap and Barra rivalry was like the original rivalry. Think about any rivalries you had now, it all came back to Barra and Zap. And even though they probably didn't even dislike each other that much, it was probably just put on more by the fans. But this is what people cared about. This is what people came to see. And they've had such an impact on Smite as a whole that I really think that I don't think I did enough justice in the first talking about it. So that's massive points in their favor because, if there's a Mount Rushmore of Smite, you've probably got Zap and Barra's heads up there as well. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was PandaCat, because I gave Cyclone a lot of props for the fact that, he was one of the best in his role in solo. He swapped and became one of the best in the world when it came to ADC, and how he's consistently held such a strong level of play. And as I said those words and kind of, sat and thought about it, I realized that I'm kind of being a bit hypocritical here, because you have Cyclone Spin, who I gave so much gas to for role swapping, for his consistency. And then I kind of forgot that PandaCat just had a season in mid. Like, he just randomly went to mid for a season in season 6. And without any real growing pains, looked comfortable. Like, looked like one of the better mids in the league. He used to play Merlin, Hebo, all this random crap, and just looked natural at it. And that's very rare. Even the better role swaps have had moments of looking uncomfortable. And maybe it helps being a mid laner on a team like that season 6 rival team that, once again, their frontline just runs everything. But Twig played mid that next year in pretty much the exact same team, and there were growing pains there. So I think, and Twig is one that you'd think would probably be better as a multi-roller, right? Like, just off the top of your head, he played mid before, blah, blah, blah. So you'd think that there'd be more growing pains with someone who's played ADC all his life coming into the mid lane. But he came in and just aced it from week 1. And at no point was he really like a hindrance to them. And in fact, they made it to Worlds Finals. Of course, they got SK'd, as everyone did that season. But he could have very easily role swapped and in his first year been a world champion, And for me to go, so I've got to give it to Cyclone, because Cyclone has, role swapped been the best in his role in both of them and all that kind of stuff, and consistent performance. Like, consistency, if you're talking consistency, you've got to talk PandaCat. And I think this was really driven home to me watching the most recent playoffs. I'm currently recording this 25th of June, so playoffs finished last week. And even when that Jade Dragons team weren't looking at their best, even when they were kind of struggling to find their normal wins like they do with, Sam, Mike, blah, 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 Panda was pulling through. The Panzabura was real, and he made it look easy. And every single game he made a strong impact. He never really dropped the ball at any point. And that's such an important skill to have as a player. It's all good having these games where you have an amazing pop-off, but then if you disappear for the next 5, brilliant. You helped win 1 game, but you've lost 5 out of 6. So what's that one good game got, Why is that important? So for me to then talk about consistency with Cyclone Spin, who I think has actually been quite up and down for the last couple of seasons. Like, he's had good moments in Radiance, good moments in this Titans team, but, hasn't been on the forefront of people's minds all this time, compared to Panda, who has just been consistently pretty top. It made me realize that I was being quite hypocritical, and I was basically moving the goalposts when it came to Cyclone. So this is an official adjudication. The adjudication panel has come in and said, overruled. Third umpire says not out. What am I on about? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I have since given the place to Panda. Well done, Panda. You have earned a random person's place in a dream team. A round of applause to you. I'm sure you're thrilled. So yeah, I didn't feel like I really agreed with what I said. So I felt the need to come back and adapt what I said. So that is it. Here I am. And so now I shall disappear back and leave you with low res version of Dan, because this camera put itself onto low quality mode before I started filming and I didn't notice. And so this has probably looked way clearer than the rest of the video. So, nightmare. Anyway, goodbye. So there you have it. That's my list. It goes Benji, Adapting, Yaman, PBM, Cycle and Spin. Do I think this team would be any good? No, I think this team would clash really badly, because that's the problem with picking the best players, that you've seen, is that players tend to look good when they are the center of attention on a team, when they're what the team's focused on. You never see the players doing the dirty grunt work and think, oh, that's the best player. I love how they're playing. But someone in a team needs to do it, which tends to be why the super team fails, because super teams in Smite history have been dreadful. Radiants have been the best of them, and the rest end up looking like PK, where your coach ends up playing solo for you at a world tournament. Like, you need to have the glue players in there, the players that keep it all together, do the hard yards to get the cooldowns and the actives and blah, blah, blah. So I think a team like this, which is just full of superstars, would probably suck. But that's my team, and I'm intrigued to hear yours, so please let me know. I'm sorry this video is so ridiculously long. Hopefully you don't mind me listening to me ramble that much, because I got shit to say. I like talking, I like Smite, so, why skimp? Yeah, let me know your teams. I want to hear them, because I'm intrigued to hear what you disagree with, what you agree with, and, and why. And you don't have to be objective either. Be as biased as you want. You can say, I think this player was better than the other one, but I like that player more, so he's in my team. Because, that's what life's all about. Thanks again so much for watching. Sorry I'm rambling for so long, but your pain is over now. You'll be freed from this video. So let me know if there's anything else you want to hear me talk about. And otherwise, deuces!